So Chris, I'm switching on the recording as well, yeah? You wanted it recorded, so.
Oh, yes, please,
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind.
Hi, Kwai.
Hi.
We're just giving a moment for some more people to join.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, I think Jace is on now as well.
Yeah.
Hi, Jace.
Hi, Jen.
I think we could probably start now. Ankit, if you wanted to.
Sure. Shall we kick off then? Yeah?
Yes.
So I will just share. So, can everyone see my screen?
Still loading.
Not yet. Not come yet. Oh, it's coming now. Yes. There.
Yes.
Okay. So we have got a bit of an agenda planned out. So I'll just run about 3 or 4 slides, and then we'll look at the product from a couple of different views. So do we want to just actually do an introduction quickly, Chris, or do we want to just get into it?
We can do a quick introduction. I mean, from the BoardRoom side, you've got the Singapore team led by Amada. You've got the Malaysian team led by Jace and Kwai Kek. And then you've got me. Who have you got from your side?
So we are basically 3 or 4 of us. So this is Uday here. We've got John, Shashank, and Ankit, who are all part of the pre-sales solution side. And I'm Uday. I run sales and business development in the APAC region. So I think that's quick and brief. So let's just get into it. All right. Now, eNate is everyone can see my screen now, I presume, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
eNate is a service orchestration platform, which is basically designed to manage humans and bots in future together at scale. So the whole idea is that you can manage all sorts of work happening, manage the entire workforce, track everything, run it optimally, and when you're ready, you can bolt on bots as well. That's what the image in the center is about. So you've got people down at the bottom and bobbleheads on top, and together work is moved forward. In terms of today's agenda, I'm not going to read out all of this, but I'll just quickly cover the basic structure. We'll first go over the product as a whole, having a look at some of the key areas, so ticketing, case, how work gets tracked, effort, all that sort of stuff. how you have transparency, run various types of allocation models, and then how we support a robotic deployment roadmap if that's of interest. Beyond that, then we will switch gears a little bit and get into something which is more payroll specific, and see how various types of calendars can be put into the system and various types of schedules, and how you can manage global standards and local variance when it comes to running similar things in different geographies slightly differently. And towards the end, we'll have a little bit of look at MI and reporting. That is going to be a little more generic, but the whole idea is to give you a sense of how we capture information and can report on it, and we'll then shut down with some Q&A. Now, I can hear some background noise. If you're not speaking, could you please put yourself in mute? Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Now, this is the scenario we're going to run through today. We got a bit of a steer about this from BoardRoom. So this is about a new hire payroll. So a customer contacts BoardRoom, sends them a request to onboard a new hire, and then it goes through this entire process of the request being triaged, processed, and then peer reviewed, QA'd, and then notified back to the customer. So we'll have a look at that flow, and following that we'll have a look at a slightly deeper dive on the payroll side of things. That's the process we're going to run through. I'm going to run one slide and then we'll move straight into the product. So this is, we are going to send a new hire payroll request via email to BoardRoom. There are going to be 2 or 3 different actors in this process. There's going to be Andy Kent, who's going to act as the engagement manager. Rebecca, who's going to be payroll admin. Andy again will peer review what the payroll admin does, and then finally there'll be Jim Cooper, who will do some validation. And how the process is about to run is, on this example we're going to start it via an email. So let me just send that out so that gets picked up. So that's the email I'm sending out. 4th April, new hire request from one of your customers saying, can you please onboard a new user here? So that's going. So once that goes in, it'll get picked up by Andy Kent, who has responsibility for that particular payroll from whichever customer it's coming from. And what Andy will do is review it and make a decision that Andy has to, it's a part of the new hire onboarding process which needs to be run. What you're seeing down below here is an actual screenshot from the product. This is called the builder. This is the definition of a process. Quickly, 3 stages. The orange bars on top are what we call steps. There's a new hire processing step where a human, so these are what we call activities down below, or tasks or actions. So some of them have got human icons against them. So this is a human activity which will be about creating the employee, doing some standard operating procedure checks, so on and so forth. This will again get peer reviewed. Then it will move on for validation. So another user will get some activity, and then finalization, where an email will automatically be sent back to the customer. We will come back to this slide as we progress. I'm going to first go and log into the product as Andy, who's the engagement manager. Now, first thing which Andy sees, so this is Andy's, who is logged in as an engagement manager, and what Andy sees is a cross section of information which Andy has ownership for. When I say information, I mean pieces of work. So Andy is looking at a subset of maybe customers, or maybe geographies, or different process types, or a specific subset of some sort of responsibility Andy has. So when Andy logs in, Andy can see a whole bunch of things down below here in the grid. Each of these line items represents a piece of work which Andy has responsibility for. How stuff comes into this grid is through various different channels. So you might have situations where customers are sending in things through emails, maybe filling in Excel, putting it somewhere on a file system, submitting a form from somewhere, or you might have got some other upstream systems which trigger a piece of work in eNate. But ultimately everything comes into eNate in this particular format with a target due date defined against it. How the due date is calculated can be based on various rules. So you might have rules saying if something comes from geography X, or from customer Y, or into this email box, or from some domain, so on and so forth, then you want it to be processed in 3 hours, 5 hours, 4 working days, so on and so forth. On the right top are all the team members of Andy's team. Now in this case there are about 5 people in the team. In front of each member there's a donut which tells Andy how many pieces of work each individual is working on at that point in time. So in this example, Moira has got 2 things in her inbox. Jim is not working on anything at the moment. Everything in the product is color coded with this red, amber, green with these rack filters. This tells Andy with one view which pieces of work are behind schedule. So everything will be in red, for example, a section of the donut, some of these dates. So those are things which are running behind schedule. Amber is stuff which is due today. So there is one thing which is due today. And green is stuff for which Andy's team still has time. So that's not going to impact or cause an SLA failure. Once you have deployed bots, I mean, assuming that you don't have any yet, and when you bring in bots, if Andy also has got some bot resources, then they will be available down here. Now Innate is a bot agnostic platform, so you can bolt and plug and play pretty much most bots. So there are 2 bot farms here. There's an Automation Anywhere bot farm and UiPath bot farm. If you haven't yet brought bots in, then you don't see this section, but I'll just quickly show this to you because this might be of longer term interest. If I click on the Automation Anywhere bot farm, as Andy, as a business user, I can see that I have also got 3 bot resources working for me, out of which 2 are offline and one of them is idle at the moment. Other things which I can see is that this bot team has got 3 pieces of work in their queue which they need to do, and about 30 minutes worth of work remaining, after which they'll go idle. Now down at the bottom here is unassigned work. So this is stuff which has come into my responsibility area but has not yet been picked up either by a human or a bot, but needs to be picked up and actioned. Now if I see here, there is something in amber here, which is 1. If I click on that, I can see this is what I sent out, new hire request, which has come in as a payroll request. It's not been assigned to someone. It's got a target SLA about a couple of hours out from now. So that's basically what I need to process. So if I now go in and if I just switch back to my slide here, this is what we've just seen. Andy is going to do a review as engagement manager of that piece of work and then launch this business process, which is to onboard that customer. So if I just go to Andy's view as a processor, now this is what a standard processor sees. So since I was a team owner previously, I was seeing everything happening here, but a standard processor, and Andy's also acting as a standard processor in this since he's the engagement manager. Andy comes in and I'm just going to talk about how work gets allocated now. Now traditionally there is the push based model which is used by a lot of businesses, where as work comes in, it is distributed in some sort of format to everybody in the team. It might be round robin or whoever's got least work or some kind of algorithm like that. However, that is not efficient, because if somebody gets stuck with a piece of work, then there is a cascading effect on everything which comes after. Pull based is what the default is in the product and is what a lot of businesses are moving to, because that is more efficient. So whenever a resource becomes available to pick up a piece of work, at that point in time, the resource asks the platform, what is the thing which I can work on next, which is the most business critical thing for us. The platform scans everything which that resource is authorized to do, except the one which is most time critical, and puts that in somebody's inbox. So in this case, Andy's going to hit this button by hitting this is called pull from queue, and if it was a bot, the bot would call the same web service code or the same the same web service behind this button and get the most time critical thing. Now this is the one piece of work which I sent out, new hire request. Once this lands in my inbox, Andy can do a bunch of things with it. I'm just going to talk about that now. First thing is here is Andy can see contextual information about what has been sent. So this is the text which has been sent out. On the right top, Andy can see when this came in. So this is information about when it landed with us in the center. Automatically, Innate has done some classification to an extent, and this might be because you might have said for this customer or for which email box this came to, so on and so forth. And it is automatically said this is for Crossroads Bank for Manchester, part of the new payroll service which we are doing, and we can define categories for it. So Andy sees this is part of a new hire, so Andy marks it as a new hire. If I go further down below, Andy can see who it was sent from, so some information about the requester. Below that is tracking information. Now a lot of businesses want to also understand where time and effort is being spent across their teams and across various processes. So simply because Andy is having a look at this and working at this at the moment, a time tracker has been switched on, which is tracking actual time being spent on this piece of work. If you want, you can also give Andy a benchmark indication. So in this case, it says about 5 minutes. So every time you give a resource a piece of work, you can give them also some advice about how much time they should aim to finish it in, and that starts optimizing things from the word go itself. Below that is files, so any attachments which come in as part of the entire process are all centralized in one location. And below that, defects, so you can log things, whether the customer didn't send you something, whether you had an internal issue, and you can kind of log all the defects in one place and then later on report on it. Now in this case, let me just talk about these parts as well. All your outbound and inbound comms into the service environment also is centralized here. Now in a lot of places, people manage it through their own emails, causing a lot of lack of visibility and control. In this case, you can put in all your canned text, all your templates in here, and everything is centralized and recorded against the transaction, so you have an entire audit history. I'll just quickly talk about merge and split. Merge is where you might get a phone call from a customer and they might send in an email as well, and you might have ended up running, let's say, duplicate pieces of work. You can merge them, track them as one. Split is the opposite, where a customer might say, by the way, along with A, can you do B for me as well? And you can essentially split that individual piece of work into two, send them out into different teams or track them against different SLAs, so on and so forth, and manage them as individual work items. In this case, Andy sees that this is for the payroll new hire service. So Andy selects that and Andy says start case. So what Andy is about to do now is essentially launch this process, and it's going to land in with a create new employee activity, which is going to get given to a user to process. So if I just hit that, I'm just going to copy the ID on there. So this was the ticket which came in, so that you can see that it's got a T that indicates it's a ticket. From that, a new hire payroll case has been launched, and under the case there's the first action or activity which has been launched. That's the create new hire employee, create new employee piece of work. So that's now about to be run. Now in our example, Rebecca is the person who has responsibility for being the payroll administrator. So this is Rebecca's login. Rebecca logs into her day, asks the system what is it that Rebecca should work on, and hits the pull more work button, and Rebecca gets a new piece of work saying this is for a new hire, this is for Crossroads Bank, this geography, this is what we're doing, and you need to create a new employee. Rebecca also gets checks down here, so Rebecca also gets instructions on what she needs to do as part of creating this employee. So log data into the payroll software. Rebecca might go to another system, do that, and might create a new employee elsewhere and come back here and confirm that that is done. Now if I log back into my manager view as Andy, and if I refresh this, I can see now there is something which has come into something which is available in the SOP checks queue. This is essentially for peer review, and this is something which needs to be done now. If I click on that, I can see what it is, but I'm also a processor, so I'm going to ask the system what should I work on next, and Andy in this case is doubling up for doing peer reviews. So in this case, Andy gets the same thing which Rebecca finished, but everything is read-only, so Andy might go through everything and double check if everything has been done correctly. And once Andy's happy, Andy might say that this is passed and good to move forward. So at this stage, we have kind of wrapped up this, and the process moves forward to validating a new hire. That's being done by Jim Cooper. So if I log in as Jim now, in fact, let me just show what's happened to that particular case as well. Behind the scenes, what Andy can choose to see from a case views perspective is how activities are progressing as they happen across teams. So if I can also go and look at the life cycle, I can see the new hire processing has been done. It's now moved to the validation step, and I can see how the entire business process is progressing through its journey. So now the next thing is sitting in the validation queue. So as I can go and see even as team owner from a central view that this is here. If I log in now as Jim, and I hit on and I ask the system what should I work on now, I get this piece of work which says validate this new hire has been set up correctly, there are no defects. I go and confirm yes, I'm happy with everything, and I hit complete. And at this point, if I go back and look at my case, I can see the first activity was done by Rebecca, I can see the second validation was done by Jim, and I can see a confirmation email. So if I go back to my slide, the last activity was an automatic activity where eNate has sent out a confirmation email. So that's been sent out, and I can see how the case has progressed, what time it got picked up, who processed it. I can go to the timeline here. This is an entire audit history of the entire transaction, what came in, who it went to, what they did on it, how much time each step took, which were the various touch points, what were all the comms in and out, the entire thing centralized in one place. Now, another thing I just want to quickly touch upon is queues. Now, these are essentially skill groups. So this is where you manage your resource mapping to the type of work which is coming in. So you might say, for example, everything which comes in of this type of work goes into QX, and these are the people who have the skills to work on QX. And as more and more users get trained, you add them to the queue. If you have got bots as part of your operations, you can add bots also to the queue. So if you look at the first queue here, you've got one human here, you've got some bots here, and in some queues you've got only humans. Now this also is something which your operations can manage. So if you have a certain spike at a certain point in time or during peak periods of different different geographies, you can move people around and temporarily loan out people and pull them into different directions, including you can do that the same thing with digital workers as well in future. Now that's one thing. Now I just want to show you quickly the process as well. So let me just get into that bit as well. So if I go here, now another thing to kind of bring out is that eNate is also a platform where you can offer different processes to many different customers. So ultimately, if you look at this particular view, then this is what we call the service matrix. So you've got all your customers here. You can be giving services to multiple different customers. You can classify them into various different contracts, service lines, and you can, if I just log into one of this is the business process we just saw running. This is a version which is running for Manchester for Crossroads Bank. And as part of this process, we have standardized. So this is the orange bars on top of what we call steps. So you might choose to run this for, let's say, a different geography, let's say Singapore, for example, and you might have a different activity down here, a second activity. So, and within an activity as well, if I just click on one of these and go into the checks. So these are what we call checks. These are what we saw. These are the instructions we gave somebody when we gave them a piece of work. So we've got global checks along with local checks. So let's say you run a payroll process in any geography. You want to enforce some certain standards. You can define those standards here. And that then becomes available and is enforced for anybody running payroll across the business. But only for Singapore, you have an additional item which you want to do, so that's a variance. Then you can add a localized variance of a check only under or let's say for Manchester, for this geography, you can add it here. And what happens in that case is when an agent or a processor gets a piece of work for that specific geography, they get that additional check. So like that, you can manage your blueprints centrally in a standardized way, and also while allowing your variants for running different things differently. I think that's from a high level. Now we'll switch gears and get into having a look at a payroll process, but we won't go into much detail. We'll just see the definition and one of them which has been executed. If you want to get into more detail, then we can do that, because I think at this stage all the concepts hopefully should be across. John, can I just hand over to you?
Sure, yeah. So but before we look at the payroll process, are there any questions based on what you've seen so far, or would you rather just look at the payroll example?
Personally, I think it was very clear. What does everybody else think? Jace, what do you think?
You may be on mute if you're speaking.
Amada? Or Kwai King? What do you think? Does it look clear?
Guys, I can see everybody is on mute, so we may not be able to hear you. Yeah, Kwai, I think we can hear you now.
Sorry, we're quite clear on that. Thanks.
Yeah, we're quite clear.
Excellent. Okay, so Ankit, if you could show the payroll process, share screen.
Yeah, John, I've just shared screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
It's just loading for me.
I can.
There we go. So here we've got an example of a pay run
Sorry,
process.
can everyone see it actually now?
Yes, come up now.
All right. John, back to you.
Okay, so we're looking at a pay run process here that we've kind of imagined based on some of the steers that we've been given. We've done quite a few payroll implementations, so this is all fairly familiar to us and hopefully kind of reflects what you understand as a pay run as well. So at the top there, we've got the high level steps. So as Uday had mentioned, those are the things that standardize the process. So regardless of the client or the geography, you can ask how many times did we do the trial run step late. So regardless of what's underneath it, we can compare at that level, or we could ask how many of our pay runs are at the payment processing step, for example. And then underneath that, the actions, what we call actions, are the individual tasks, are the things that we can vary by client or by geography, and those define the localization, if you like. So I don't think we need to go all the way through this in terms of the front end, but hopefully this makes some sense in terms of what you've seen from Uday. Each one of these actions can go to an individual anywhere, anywhere in the world. As long as they've got a login to Innate, then they get given that activity. Obviously, after the first action is completed, then the next one will start automatically. In this example, we've got a UiPath bot picking up the pre-gross to net processing action. And when the bot has finished that, the system will immediately launch the next action, the pre-gross to net checks, and that will be auto allocated to the appropriate person in the organization. So in terms of how we kick this process off, there's various ways that we can start work in Innate. One, as you've seen, is from email, but we can also create one of these manually at any time. And for payroll, the more normal way that hopefully sounds familiar to you is that it's scheduled work. You know, for a customer that you're going to be doing the pay run for them in June this year. You don't need to wait till then for somebody to start it manually. So we can start these processes from a schedule. And you'll see down the bottom there that this process is linked to a schedule which we've called the main payroll schedule. And you could have a schedule for every client or even every payroll if you've got multiple payrolls within a client. And Ankit, if you just switch over to the schedule view. So here's a view of a simple schedule which we created. There's only 3 rows in here that they're monthly periods, but they could equally be more ad hoc. So you could have one that's every 3 weeks, for example, or a lunar, based on a lunar calendar, or a 4-4-5 if you're familiar with that concept in terms of cycles. And this can vary by client. So you might have one client that gets paid lunar, but another client that's based on a 4-4-5 calendar. So this is completely flexible. We can set up whatever dates we want in here. And normally these are the dates that you would agree with your clients. But the thing to understand here is that these are completely configurable. So we've kind of guessed what the steps might be around trial run, for example. But if there's other steps that you have, they can certainly be easily added to this to this structure. Are there any questions around the schedule? Because I know in payroll this is obviously normally quite a key part of the solution requirement. So do you have any questions around this?
No, I think it's clear. Is everybody else clear?
Yeah, clear.
Okay.
Yeah, clear, Chrissy.
Cool, excellent. So the case that we go back to the case view, Ankit. So each one of these processes will launch according to the schedule that it's linked to. So that could be the 1st of the month, but could also be the 10th of the month, depending on the cycle. And then also the due dates of the actions can be linked to those steps. So obviously, if the pay date is say the 25th of every month, you don't want to wait until the 23rd to find out that stuff is behind schedule. So we can kind of spread the work out, if you like. So each step might be based on how you arrange your work with your client. There may be 5 days between each of the steps, and then the work within that step can also be spread out so that the last action in that step is due on the agreed date, and then the action before that might be due half a day before, so that everybody's got time to complete their piece of the process. Okay, so Ankit, do you want to just quickly have a look at the case process and run through a few actions?
Yeah, John.
Sorry, I have a question. This is
Sure.
Armida from Singapore office. I just want to clarify. So the process is that it will be triggered upon the, let's say, the engagement manager's email.
Can I just take that, John? There are multiple ways to trigger it. Now, I don't know how your infrastructure is set up maybe. So if you're using a shared mailbox where you're getting, typically you would use some sort of a shared or centralized mailbox where customers would send something and eNate would then directly be, monitoring that mailbox, picking up something and creating a piece of work in here. Usually it is not configured to, look at somebody's personal mailbox. There's no technical issue with that, but they might be having, they might be getting their personal mails as well. So usually you would have some sort of a, shared mailbox infrastructure, and that set of mailboxes eNate would be looking at. Does that make sense?
Okay, we understand. Okay, just a follow-up question. So that would mean if, let's say, we have 4 engagement managers and we have like 500 clients, each of the engagement managers will have to be checking the inbox constantly just to identify that, okay, this new email is for me, then I will be delegating it to my staff. Is that how it's gonna work?
Yes. They would not have to monitor the mailbox. They will, if a mail comes into those boxes and if eNate is monitoring all those 4 mailboxes, then we can set up rules which do, as long as there is some mechanism to identify and map which piece of work is for which engagement, it can be put into that engagement manager's queue.
All right, I think that one will be better because we're just worried like maybe 500 emails and 4 of us are gonna check each of the individual emails. But if you can tag it to respective EMs, then that would be much better.
Correct.
And I think the other thing, Karen, is that we might decide that actually the engagement manager is not the right person. So quite often when I've worked on systems like this, we employ what we call a gatekeeper. And the gatekeeper,
okay.
yeah, is to manage that inbox.
That would be helpful, Grace. Yeah.
And another thing I'll just call out there for clarity, there is typically not that much requirement to sit and look at email boxes as such. Ultimately, when a piece of work comes, if it has got some identification mechanism on it. For example, the customers, if it's come to a specific email or there's some way the init can detect it, then it'll push it down right to that team's queue. Then there is sometimes a role which we call triage, which I think is similar to what Chris has just described, where if the system cannot auto detect something, that's when it's put into somebody's, in front of somebody's eyes, and with a due date against it, saying, have a look at this. So only stuff like that which spills over, they have to pick up. I mean, the whole the whole sitting and monitoring things manually, waiting for things to happen, that sort of is no longer the case, if that makes sense.
Okay. Since I've resumed the schedules, and the schedule is now starting to create cases in eNet, I've logged in as a manager. I know there's a team leader whose name is Brian Thomas, and there is one piece of work and action is come to the queue, which is in the collect data, which is automatically launched by the schedule. Now, so if I just open this one, we can see how on the case level how this action has been started, and it says that it's launched by main payroll schedule for April 2019. Now I'm gonna log in as one of the user whose name is Rebecca.
Ankit, let's not go through the whole process. It's a repeat. Do we have one which you have already run where we can look at the audit history? Unless there's something you want to show which we didn't cover in terms of concepts.
Yeah, just one thing. So that's a good screen to stop on, Ankit. So an important thing to understand is that this screen, what we call a case, has got a unique reference there. So you can see it's 10176. That's the unique reference for this particular pay run. So this could be for a particular client for a particular month, and all of the information about that pay run, so that could be for one of your clients from, say, last November, it'll all be in one place. So you can see all of the communications, all of the actions, if they're human or robotic actions. You can see how long they took. You can see any errors that were on there, any files that have been attached. You can see the contacts that were involved. Everything is in one place for that, what we call a case. For payroll, that would be a pay run. You might also have a case for onboarding a new person if it's an HR process, for example. So you've got one place where you can go back and see all of the information for that particular deliverable, if you like.
So Ankit, if we just look at the who processed it and the activities, if you can just run us through that, I think that will be a good view. For example, collate changes, just point your mouse to where we are. Collate changes was done by Tina, for example. After that, it went to a bot, so that Marvin is a bot's name basically, who did the pre-gross to net processing. Afterward, Damien picked it up and did some checks. That's the third from the bottom. And like this, you can kind of see the entire history of things, how long each stage took, what was done on it, so on and so forth. Yeah. So in terms of mechanics, it's exactly like we saw in the previous run-through. Now, shall we go and see the MI, or do we want to discuss a little bit more about this?
Are there any questions about the pay run kind of side of things? Does that reflect how you kind of do payroll? Does it reflect your operations?
Yes, I think so. Guys, what is it? Does it reflect what you're doing? No one's speaking.
In case
silence as agreement.
No, it might be because people are mute. Actually, you have to unmute yourself before you speak.
You have to unmute.
Could be one of the reasons, at least. All right, let's go to the MI and let's have a look at that.
I think it looks like Jace. What do you think?
So basically, so for all the emails from all the clients, we'll have to preset the rules, right? So when we have preset the rules, then it will go to the assigned person. How if it's in the event that we get an email that has been not preset and rules are not set, and there are no keywords for the system to pick up? So that will be in the box where it's visible for the team manager to look into. Am I right?
So that will go to somebody who can be designated as the person who has to pick up things which have not been auto-detected. So we call that sort of a role, a triage role. And then that person could then read it, understand the context, and manually choose to launch any specific business process. So that can be a specific payroll, it can be for if you're doing F&A processes, if you're doing anything else, they can choose to then launch, which one it is and send it down that route. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Thanks.
Cheers. John, I think let's just look at some MI and then we can come back to Q&A. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so Ankit, if you could switch over to the some of the MI.
So I'll just make a broad brush statement around MI before we get into the specifics. Now, for this demo, we don't have MI which is payroll specific, but I think what we are trying to demonstrate is that there are lots of different data pieces which the system is collecting as you're going through stuff. So things like the number of things which came in, who they went to, how much time they took to process. One piece of, let's say, parent represents how many, even things like pay slips, for example, you might hold that level of detail depending on whatever you want to hold. How much time it took to do various things, and all sorts of information. Was it timely? Was it done as per SLAs? So on and so forth. Ultimately, you can report on and put the number of geographies, customers, types of processes, all that stuff. Ultimately, you can report on any sort of permutation and combination and cross-section of that. What we are showing you is some reports which are basically out of the box, some standardized ones. So most businesses will use part of the standard ones and then have some bespoke ones which are more representational of their specific area. So John, back to you.
Yeah, okay, so obviously work items that flow through our system, they've got some commonality, so around when the work started, when it was completed, how long it took on task, when it was due, and we can use all that information really generically to compare and see trends in work items regardless of what kind of line of business it's in. So for a client where you might offer multiple lines of business, you can see in one place how their service is being delivered. So some of these graphs, as Uday said, they're not payroll specific. They're looking more at operations and how operations are working and are the things being delivered on time. And you can use filters at the top to look at a specific client or a specific payroll for specific periods and see both right now what's the state of play, where are we late, where do we need to focus our attention, but also historically some of the lines on here indicate the direction of travel. Are we getting slower? Are we getting quicker? Are we creating more errors? And there might be some correlation between we've stopped being late, but we've started creating errors, for example, and this kind of MI will show that. With regards to the bespoke MI, obviously we don't have in our system bespoke payroll data, but it's very, very easy for us to add custom data, what we call custom data. So, for example, the number of pay slips or a financial figure, so maybe the total payout figure, something like that, we can very easily add into the system just for yourselves, and that can be tracked through the MI as well. So just scrolling down, just to give you a flavour of some of the visualizations that we use. Obviously, a lot of bar graphs are an obvious choice for visualizing some of these concepts, but other MI that we've got, we might choose a different visualization. So Ankit, if you go to the productivity, so we saw when Uday was showing the time tracking, we had the idea of a benchmark, and we can use the benchmark to approximate productivity. So based on how long things should take, we can plot where resources are perhaps being very well utilized. So maybe they're on task all the time, but their output isn't very great. So the utilization is high, productivity is low.
John, can I ask you a question on that? So
Certainly.
on that, is the system intuitive to learn each process and create that benchmark, or do we have to input that benchmark?
Yes and no. So the MI will point you. So the intuitive bit comes from measuring how long it does take. So, I mean, this is an age-old problem for managers. I mean, just because something does take on average 7 minutes doesn't mean that it can't be done quicker. So your benchmark might be a bit of a stretch goal, but your average handling time, the actual average handling time might be greater than that. And then you've got a decision to make about what you do to update it. I don't think we'd want the system to automatically update that value based on actuals, because you'd probably find it grow fairly quickly. There's a phenomena called Parkinson's rule. So if you give somebody 20 minutes to do a job, they will likely take 20 minutes, even if they could have done it in 15. So there's some subtleties around that, but we can certainly update it.
Okay.
I have another question. Maybe let me just go back a bit. For the due SLA, or
Yep.
the due deadlines of each the ticket. So is the due date configurable based on client's calendar, or is it something linked to to the company's SLA?
So we can do either. So in the payroll example we looked at, that was that the scheduled due dates were linked to the dates that you'd agreed with your client. Now, obviously, if you've got, typically I've seen payroll calendars that have around 5 key dates, and obviously the pay date is the number one key date there. But you might have 20 actions that stretch across those 5 dates, and you don't want to have to agree those internal dates with your client. So with our system, you can agree the kind of key dates, the milestones for the process, and then we can use what we call an offset to be relative to those dates, so that everything doesn't all become due all at once. So we can spread things relative to those dates. In the case of the email that came in, that's based on the client and the category. So you might have for one client, a change might be 2 days to turn it around, but for another client, the same change might have a 3-day SLA, and we can certainly cope with that as well.
So in the short answer as well to your question, Armida, is that you can do both. You can have it centrally or client specific.
Additional question is that since everything, once we receive the ticket, right, there will be a lag. I mean, it will be timestamped. So there will be a separate SLA for the inputs or the email from client to the end that we answered the email, and separate monitoring as well, or separate SLA on the reporting part. Is it?
So just go back, Ankit, for a second to the process diagram. So if you see the screen from and Ankit, just follow it with your mouse from the left top to the right bottom. So from the collate data to the right end, that is your case due date. So that's the due date for the entire case by when it needs to be finished. For each of the steps, so that's the orange blocks, there's also a date calendar there, if you see that. So that's the due date for that particular step or stage in between. Within that, if you go down below, there's a UiPath activity, there's a couple of human activities. Each of them also have their own due dates. So ultimately, your entire case's due date is one concept, but within that, all the subsections which together make the entire end-to-end case also have their intermediate due dates. So ultimately, when work is being driven to individuals and teams and stuff like that, what eNate is essentially doing is tracking what is the next thing from a intermediate step point of view. So everything is sort of finished in time so that it all builds up to the right target overall due date. Does that make sense?
So the way I'm looking at this is your orange bars across the top are like your payroll calendar, and then within each task or orange bar, you might have specific things. So you might have clients that say we want our new starters input within 48 hours.
Correct.
So there's like an overarching calendar for each part of the process or each task within the process. And then there could be an SLA specifically directed at certain elements of data or certain categories of data.
Yes.
That's the way I'm looking at it. Yeah. Does that make sense, Almeida?
Yes.
I have a question. Is it possible for us to change the due date? Because, for example, we have an arrangement with the client that on this day they will be sending the movements, and we're kind of waiting for the data, but they haven't sent. So we're just worried that if we are unable to change the due date, then our SLA will be affected because it's like a delay on our part, although the client is the one who is delayed.
Yes, you can. So that's what you're seeing on screen now. You can override it if you choose to. However, I mean that's a business. That's a business decision. You could also, track delayed submissions and things like that, and report them back to your client as well. I mean, it's up to you. You could manually override and push it forward if you wanted.
Oh, sorry, I'm Koi King here. I have a question. Which means that we can change every month the calendar, the due date calendar, because some of the clients says their calendar is changed every month. So can we do that?
Yes, you can change the schedule.
We can change the schedules by monthly.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. Okay.
So I just have a business kind of question. Do you have once you agree dates with your clients, do you continue to change that through the year? And if a client has submitted something behind schedule, they are all right with you, changing the due date, because ultimately it'll impact when people get paid, right? I mean.
Yeah, in the perfect world, Uday, we would not do that. But our clients have been given a very high level of service previously, so it's very difficult to change clients who are already operating in that way. Moving forward, we want to become a little tougher. And, for example, if clients are submitting late data, then SLAs don't apply. If they submit late data, we can't be held to the SLA performance.
Okay.
That the client's contracted for or whatever. But the thing is, at the moment, we've got no system to capture. So I couldn't say to you, oh, client XYZ submitted their data late on this number of occasions and this impacted the payroll. Whereas I feel with this system, we could probably identify trends of late data and impact on errors, et cetera, et cetera.
So that is actually part of the goal, because you will have all the data about what was submitted late and where the defects were originating from. So you will actually have metrics based on which you can then have that discussion. That's right.
That's right.
Okay, so does that answer the question which we just had? Is there any other question as well, or should we head back to the MI?
Yeah. Yes, we have a bunch of questions. Sorry.
No, sure. Please go for it.
One more question is when it comes to, I think from the earlier slide you show us the graph on the MI. Is it MI? The MI. Yeah. So we just want to know, let's say for one manager, if we have maybe around 10 staff, and then at the point of assigning the ticket to one of our staff, is there a way that we can see individual staff's capacity during the time?
You can see what they're working on, which we saw inside in the so let me just kind of call out these two interfaces. So Ankit, if you just go back to Work Manager, the left tab, I think, on the screen, I can see one there. Yeah, so this is your sort of operational dashboard where you kind of see things on a day-to-day basis and where ops users and processors operate out of. So this is the person who owns the team, and they can see things like, if you look on the top, there are 3 individuals there who are not working on anything. The left bottommost one, James, has got the highest amount of work in their inbox. So there is information like that you can see here from actual things happening right now on ground situation. If you go back to the MI, this is basically information which is more for for understanding trends, for managers to review how things are progressing and things like that. And this is basically also kind of available to look at, but usually the number of users who look at MI will be more sort of users who have responsibility from a accountability perspective and who are trying to improve things. From an operational perspective, it's mostly what is on screen now. It's usually a smaller set of users who go into the MI. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I can see from this screen, it's only, let's say this is my team. I can only view for my team. Is there a way that we can view for overall, maybe,
yes.
Let's say in payroll, we have 4 managers.
Yeah, absolutely. For that, if you go back to the MI, Ankit, so on this view, ultimately you can slice and dice data across the entire business, different service lines, and I mean you can kind of extract whatever kind of visualization you want across the entire installation. Yeah, do we have something here, Ankit or John? Do you know if you have something which is across a whole bunch of things?
Yeah, so the filters at the top will allow you to filter to see any level of detail. So scroll up, Ankit. So we can add filters here to show, this is probably just for one team, but we can obviously show a certain, if you're in multiple offices, then we can show just for one office, and we can go down right down to the individual user, and from the user we can obviously build.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. Is it possible if we scroll down? We wanted to look at what's at the bottom part. Some more.
Okay.
Which one? Busy Fools.
So let me just explain this report actually. If you just bring this whole thing into view, Ankit. So this is a grid-based productivity report, basically productivity and utilization. You got one axis which is productivity, so that's the one going top to bottom, and you got another one which is capacity. Each of the dots on screen represents one of your FTEs, basically one of the people doing work, and the orange ones actually are bots. So if you just hover your mouse, okay, actually let me just explain that a bit more. So ultimately what you want to see is all your resources. Just don't hover the mouse, okay, it'll just be a distraction for now. So ultimately you want to see all your resources on the right top quadrant. That basically means that they are highly productive, means they are doing things as per their benchmark times, and they are also working their entire shift, which basically means if they, let's say they are tasked to work for 8 hours a day, then all the work which they're doing is actually adding up to 8 hours or close, which means they are doing things efficiently and they're working their entire shift. If you have things in the second quadrant on the left side, I could just move your mouse there. Don't hover on any dot. So yeah, if you move to, so that if you've got users in that grid, that basically means that they are doing things efficiently, but they are not putting maybe 8 hours of work. They might be doing 3 hours or 4 hours. Right bottom is the opposite of that. That's the busy fools section which you just called out. That basically means people are spending, or bots are spending a lot of time doing stuff, working their entire shift, but are just not getting enough work done. So they are just lagging behind schedule. So maybe they are training requirements. If you are using digital resources, maybe the code is not efficient, things like that. And any resources which are on the left bottom grid are essentially low productivity and low capacity. So neither are they doing things fast as per benchmarks, nor are they running their entire schedule if it's a bot, or doing their entire 8 hours or whatever the working days if they are humans. So you've kind of got a question whether they're adding value to your business or not. If you just hover on one of the blobs now, Ankit. So that's telling you various sort of information about how long they worked, what did they do, all sorts of productivity and capacity metrics. So you can quickly spot who the performers are and where you need to focus and who you can utilize more. Hopefully that's clear.
Does that all make sense? Are there still questions on that? Hello.
Are there any other questions?
No more from our side.
Okay.
Nothing from the side as well. Thanks.
Is there anything else we want to show, guys, in terms of reports, or are we? Yeah, actually, I want to show one. Is there anything else which any of you want to show?
No, go for it.
Yeah, okay, so if you just give me back control for a second. I just have an open question. How much interest is, I mean, are you looking at bringing in bots and robotics and those kind of things? Is that area of interest?
We're nowhere near that stage, actually.
Okay.
The reason why I've liked this solution previously is because it actually gets you to that stage quicker than other case management solutions that I've seen, but we're nowhere near bots right now.
Okay. Would you, I mean, out of interest, do you want to see how you can prepare for it, or I mean, or are we done for today? I mean, from our side, I suppose.
I think we're good for today. I think everybody's in shock. In terms of
hopefully that's a good shock,
solution. Though. No, good shock. I think. I think they need some. Amida, guys, tell me if I'm wrong, but I think you need some time to digest how we could implement a solution like this to BoardRoom and how it would help us. Is that correct?
Yes, you're definitely right.
Yes.
So that's why there are no questions. Okay.
Yeah. But that's really good. I really want to thank you for the demonstration today. It was, I think it was on point. So I think that's good. If you could send us the recording, I think that would be really useful as well, so that we can show other people within the business. And I think once everybody's had a bit more time to digest it, I think there'll probably be some more questions that come out of that. But yeah, just really want to thank you for your time today.
Most welcome. Thank you all for taking time out as well. So we will wrap up since there are no more questions, and I will send out the recording shortly after.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.